Now, our final session today, it is a fireside chat and one well worth waiting for as we have a very special guest host who you've just seen. We are talking cloud and clean energy tech innovation and sustainability impact for the future of data center. Our guest is Brian Marrs, Senior Director, Energy and Carbon Removal at Microsoft. And of course, our guest moderator. We welcome back Susanna Kass, co-founder, InfraPrime Energy Fellow at Stanford University. Hello to both of you again. Hello, Susanna. Welcome, Brian. Good to see you. And Susanna, the floor is yours.
For having us, and good afternoon and good morning for those who actually just joined us from North America. And I know a few of you folks are actually in Asia Pacific. So good, I guess good evening or good, very early morning to you. So we absolutely is so delighted to actually have a good friend of mine and somebody in the industry I truly admire, Brian Marrs, who is actually with us today. So hello, Brian. How are you?
Warm greetings from Seattle. I'm doing great. How are you doing, Sam?
That sounds great. Well, let me give a bio, which I probably don't give it to justice of Brian because of the sake of time. He has done so much for our industry. Brian is currently with Microsoft. He's actually in charge of a lot of scope within Microsoft for his tenure there. I know from his senior leader, they're so excited to actually welcome Brian back into the U.S., given his extensive background and what he have done in Europe. So Brian has more than 15 years, and I actually felt like he's such a giant in our industry in cloud and energy for what he have done. It's not really measured by the number of years of his tenure. It's really measured by the impact and the ambition and the remarkable passion that he basically have in driving Microsoft data center energy and carbon negative strategy. He has also have led teams, and he hired many people into Microsoft, who I also admire from the utility industry and whatnot, by bringing in his team, leading energy infrastructure planning, leading Microsoft to be one of the forefront and pioneer in energy supply agreement, working collaboratively with the electric industry, which is the utility partnership, and most recently have done something that we have never had, the largest deal, breakthrough sciences in terms of carbon removal. So stay tuned. We're going to go into a lot of depth because you're genuinely talking with the inventor, the co-founder of on doing this work. So prior to him joining Microsoft in the year 2017, which seems like yesterday to Brian, but then it seems like so long ago. I guess you can feel like so short and so long for the same time. And he has also worked as a director of policy and strategy of NRG Energy, and the largest competitive power company in the United States, very respectful company. And he is also a power system economist in the European Union at the German Energy Agency and Vanderfall in Europe. So he has extensive background in terms of bringing from a policy, the EU perspective, and also from the utility perspective, which is why he's so good. One of the reasons why I really admire Brian from afar and near is actually his quantitative analytics skill, because I'm a computer scientist, so I can really relate someone who really tackled the hard, complex problem in terms of global power, oil and gas market altogether. He served as a delegate economist to many COP delegations and also worked very closely with the UN Goodwill Ambassador. So amazing history. Of course, the academia is no small feat, having an energy economics and policy background from Yale University and also completed his undergrad study at University of Virginia. So this is just a snapshot of what Brian summarized in terms of his bio. His day-to-day work is even more as a giant for our industry. So Brian, maybe I can ask you a question. First of all, it's absolutely a privilege to have you join us. So let's take it from the top of the amazing achievement that you have done for Microsoft since the early days in 2017 and the data center industry, which seems so far ago, in terms of the cloud and innovation of Microsoft has come. Can you talk to us a little bit about how you organize your team? What might be some of the work that you have done that led to Microsoft being a leader and a hyperscaler from an energy infrastructure perspective? So let's start there in terms of the very beginning, and then we can bring it current for the audience about your work recently.
Yes, thanks. And look, it's such an honor to be here with you, and you've been such a paragon of leadership for our industry across cloud, energy, and sustainability. So this is a great conversation. I really appreciate you hosting it. And it has been, on that note, such a privilege to be at Microsoft during this time. I feel like we've had breathtaking growth from just a few dozen data center regions globally to over 80 today. And I think along the way, we've really defined a leadership as an innovator in all things sustainability. And I think this next wave of hyperscale growth is only going to double down on both cloud expansion, but also sustainability as an enabling condition. I like to say Microsoft's always allowed me to pursue two things that I really love in my professional life. The first one is building high-performing teams, and the second is pursuing first-of-a-kind technologies and commercial deals. In terms of the team leadership, I've led teams in data center site selection. We've worked with over 30 plus global utilities on all things ranging from MVHV design and stand up to rate negotiations in 28 plus different countries. If you're an energy nerd and you love rate negotiation and you love thinking about the business model of power market design from Japan to Mexico to Sweden to Virginia, which is actually my home state, Microsoft and this industry are a great place to be. So that's been thrilling, and thinking about the geographics and the intersection of technology, regulations, and business. In terms of first of its kind deals, there's a lot to pick from, but I think the core has been looking at a partner pilot scale model. And there's really just three quick highlights I'll throw out there. Our team, and all of this is collaborative within Microsoft, and it's been humbling to work with so many smart people from across the company and the different engineering disciplines that we have, and with our external partners. Microsoft has pushed a clean fuels purchasing program, and one of the first deals we worked on was with a company called Preem in Sweden, and we qualified the use of HVO, ultra low carbon diesel fuel, and emergency backup systems with Caterpillar for the first time. So trying to decarbonize that piece of our value chain with a company called Fortum, which is a very large power and district heating network company in the Nordic space out of Finland. Microsoft will reject heat from our data centers into the district heating network and accelerate faster decarbonization of the local heating area and further that decarbonization on a much faster timeline. And we have really ambitious clean energy targets. I know we're going to talk about carbon removal in just a second, but on our clean energy targets, we have a 100-100-0 target. We have an entire fabulous team that's signing PPAs. I think we've signed about 13 to 14 gigawatts of PPAs to date. And we have a 24/7 clean energy target. And we've worked with companies like Vattenfall, NECO, and AES on enabling these deals. And I think more importantly, our role not just as a buyer of clean energy, but also providing software solutions to these companies. Vattenfall is a great example, where they can offer 24/7 products to their whole customer book, really enabling and expanding the impact beyond Microsoft. So those are just a few quick examples and thinking about how we drive impact and how we're thinking about sustainability and energy.
Well, it's a very holistic strategy from an end-to-end perspective. No wonder actually your leadership are very bold in terms of your ambition. Not only are we actually just achieving a carbon negative for your data center and your own usage, but you also thought about it from a community and a social energy perspective and environment perspective in terms of being carbon negative. So with that, perhaps we can do a deeper dive. Recently, Microsoft tackled one of the hottest topics of carbon removal. That's the whole premise of why we're actually moving away from fossil fuel into the whole carbon-free energy economy anyway, which is something I really, really support and work hard at for decades now. So Microsoft signed not so much just a deal perspective, but a multi-year transaction that is really helping to set the stage and inspiring for removal up to 350,000 metric tons of CO2 with the work that you have done. So I know you have been the founding thoughts in terms of the strategy and also leading the execution with the team that you build and collaborative with your colleagues and your leadership. So Brian, can you share with the audience today, what was the strategic thinking that led up to actually leading that effort? And how did it go? What are the lessons actually being learned in terms of working with Heirloom, Ørsted, or Climeworks? Because you're frankly all over. You're looking at the ocean, you're looking at the land, you're looking at the air, so which is very holistic in terms of your vision. Can you please take the time to walk us through what does that really mean and how can we be part of it in terms of achieving this absolute zero impact results?
Yeah, thank you. So I've spent my whole career focused on power utility, economics and policy, but I'm really excited about carbon removal. And I think carbon removal really is the next equivalent of a clean energy PPA for our industry. And I think it'll be one of the next evolutions of corporate impact on climate. So there's three ideas I want to unpack here. What is carbon removal? Go through that really quick. Why is it important to Microsoft? And then maybe elaborate a bit on the deals that you mentioned. So what are we doing? What action are we taking in this space? And so carbon removal might be new to some folks in this audience. It's really a technology set or land management practice set that removes carbon from the air, soil, or ocean. So examples are direct air capture. We've got a machine that literally pulls carbon right out of the air. Biochar, where you lock in carbon through a pyrolysis technology set. And then afforestation, so different land management practices to grow trees. So not avoided deforestation, but actually growing trees from the beginning. And so when we look at all these technology sets, we can say, why is this important? And really, carbon removal is the missing piece of the net zero equation. We have reductions, which is what energy and taking action on hard to abate materials. You know, we can push down our carbon emissions, and then we need to remove emissions, and that reductions plus removal needs to equal zero, or in Microsoft's case, at least -1 to be carbon negative. And so the only way to address legacy emissions, historic emissions, which Microsoft's target, our 2050 net zero target, actually contemplates that we would remove all the carbon in scope 1 and 2 emitted since the company's founded in 1975. So carbon removal is the only tool to address legacy emissions. And indeed, when you look at the IPCC targets to hit the 1.5 degree thresholds set in the Paris Agreement, carbon removal is a key piece over the next 20 years to develop to hit that threshold. And I think the second driver, in addition to legacy emissions, is hard to abate sectors could take a decade or more to fully decarbonize. So we are prioritizing reductions over removals in our plans. Our Climate Innovation Fund has invested in about a dozen companies that are focused on green steel, cement, all these different materials that you'd use in the EPC functions to build data centers. We recently announced a pilot with Minus Materials to decarbonize our concrete at one of our data centers in Quincy. So we have these great examples of action that we're taking on reducing hard to abate emissions, but carbon removal can also help us address those residual emissions on a faster timeline. So it's sort of a backup to reductions or a plan B in that sense, when and where needed. So just to double down on the actions that we're taking, and you mentioned some of these deals, we think that we're the largest corporate buyer of carbon removal in the world right now. We signed the world's carbon removal deal, which you mentioned with Ørsted, where that's a bioenergy carbon capture deal where Ørsted will combust biomass in district heating system, capture the carbon, and store it in the Northern Lights project under the North Sea. We also recently signed a deal with Heirloom, as you mentioned. It's a direct air capture company, which we believe is the largest carbon removal deal in the United States, and we're very excited about it. It uses a very different technology platform than the BECCS platform that we have with Ørsted. So we're taking a portfolio approach and investing and buying from a number of different technology platforms to further this industry along. And it really feels like the beginning of the renewable PPA movement among corporates, where we're trying to to buy down the technology curve and really hit scale where long-term agreements, long-term financing can really support these technologies and their cost declines and performance over time. So I think that's some of the color that I can provide around our carbon removal business. And again, I'm really excited about this, and I think that it's sort of the next wave of corporate engagement on sustainability.
Definitely. Thank you so much. Can you comment a little bit more about some of the challenges that we have in a data center relating to the carbon throughout the supply chain? Because oftentimes we are either dealing with it from an operating carbon or maybe from a material perspective. I know your colleagues are working really hard about thinking about the whole zero embodied carbon material. But how about talk a little bit more from a carbon capture perspective in your viewpoint and your outlook? What is Microsoft's position about approaching the whole supply chain?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think of Scope 3 supply chain emissions as sort of the final frontier in terms of reductions towards net zero. And I think the reason it's so challenging is it's this massive collective action problem where we need suppliers of suppliers of suppliers of suppliers in some cases to coordinate across very large geographic boundaries. So I think that one of our first roles as a convener to show that this is important to Microsoft and try to pull different parties together to see where we can be creative up and down our supply chain emissions to solve that collective action problem. So thinking about all of our electronics manufactured components and sort of looking across the entire supply chain and mapping those emissions out, I think is itself a service towards putting a light on where some of the solutions can be. And I think that much like our Scope 2 position, where corporate PPAs and clean energy have played a really big role, when we look across most of our upstream supply chain, clean energy, again, plays a huge role in pushing forward the overall reduction pathways, and then really helps isolate the ultra hard to abate spaces that we were talking about in clean materials or steel or copper or cement. And so again, I think that clean energy is going to just be an absolute pivotal piece of the solution over the next 20 years, both for us and for our suppliers. And I think that carbon removal fits into the overall portfolio very much the way it would Microsoft's. The hard to abate residual emissions, looking at legacy emissions, but staying focused on reductions first and foremost.
Indeed, actually, Brian, I totally agree with you. And in your background, it is just impeccable that you work at the nexus of both public and private. Since you actually made the announcement of the agreement from a private sector perspective, the government actually follow you in terms of from a public sector perspective in terms of giving out more grants into the area, because you actually help to spotlight that it is an issue that needs attention. So I am actually personally very inspired by a lot of efforts that you all have done, but sincerely, for the public-private to collaborate and given your extensive background, this will be great and actually crossing across the region. Perhaps you can actually share with the audience as we're coming up on a wrap, what might be the takeaway and actions that they can take so they can collaborate and be part of the ecosystem that you're actually helping to convene? Because I know many of the audience are very excited and wanted to learn more, but at the same time, I encourage them to not just read about the news, but take action. So what advice would you give to the audience?
Yeah, it's such an important thought. To circle back to something I said, I'd say partner pilot scale. And when I look at the sheer growth in this industry, it's humbling. It can also be a bit overwhelming. How would you change the direction of this industry looking at just the sheer amount of gigawatts growth into the future? And I'd say it starts with an idea that we can first figure out how to action and take it step by step. And so, when I look across the space and where I've seen success at Microsoft, it's been really the humble engineering ground up perspective, where you can find the right partnerships, you can pull that into a pilot, whether that's waste heat or clean fuels or 24/7 pilots or carbon removal pilots, and then you can think about how to scale it from there. So I just think there's a lot of creativity at that really early stage of validating innovation and engineering.
Indeed. And Brian, one of the key thing about our theme right now is definitely you're very innovative. So you're really high up there in terms of being such a visionary and a co-founder, not so much actually just Microsoft for this very important topic, but for the entire data center industry, or actually the industry in general. Do you see AI play a role in terms of some of the carbon removal technology? What is your outlook on that? And what is your vision in terms of looking out? How does other technologies such as AI will be able to help accelerate what I call the carbon-free economy, with carbon removal being a very important part of it?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think we're in the early days of AI, but I'm hopeful and bullish that AI can be a powerful tool to help unlock sort of the innovation that I was talking about. Finding new battery chemistries for storage, finding new capture chemistries for chemical catalysts to more efficiently capture carbon and store it. So I think we're just at the very beginning of thinking about all the questions that we could answer on such a rapid scale to pursue materials decarbonization, power system decarbonization, and the operations of the power system in a renewable-centric world, and then also how we more effectively manage carbon through removal going forward. So I view AI as a catalyst for positive change.
Well, perhaps we can tap into you as a domain expert as we start building out, the foundation model for, using, large language model to really truly understand about the effectiveness and the efficiency of the different technique, actually how we can do that. And maybe then AI can actually help us to come up with something that we didn't even think about by the intersectionality. So it would be fantastic to welcome you to work with a scientist in terms of looking at a lot of these very hard problems combined with weather, climate, and carbon removal technology, which is thereby itself fairly complex in terms of, what does that mean for the entire value chain? So it would be welcome to have you join us in that journey and guide us along the way.
That sounds great. Sign me up.
So thank you, Brian, for being with us, and thank you, audience, for joining us today. So any last word, Brian, for us before we turn it back to the event organizer?
It's been a real honor. I think I've used sustainability as an input for hyperscale going forward, not an output. And on that note, just again, partner pilot scale. Let's do it. Let's make things happen.
That sounds terrific. Thank you very much, Brian. And with that, I think I'm going to turn it over to the event organizer to say goodbye and thank you to the audience. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
And thanks to you both. What a fantastic way to close the first day of the show. Brian, Susanna, thanks ever so much for your company. Really enjoyed it this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed.